Okay guys, welcome to another tutorial. So today we're going to look at actually the basic animation that we can do in After Effects to animate a graph. So for example, a figure that we might have exported from our analysis in our studio as a sort of PNG or an EPS file, and we want to animate that to sort of tell a story in After Effects. So first thing I'm going to do is just open up some code that I've produced, which I'll provide in the description along with the data or a link to the data. And this very simply is just, we're going to load in the tidyverse. If you don't have this in your installed already as a package, you'll want to install that. Set our working directory, read in our example data set. We're just going to use the pipe command to sort of create a couple of new data sets, and then use ggplot here just to plot that out. So this is what our graph looks like down there in the plots panel, and this is going to be the graph that we want to animate in After Effects. So there's two lines there. And note that it doesn't really matter what color the lines are at this stage, because we're going to be able to modify and do all of that in After Effects. So what we want to do is come down and export it and save as image from the plot panel down here, not using ggSave, but this is a far more efficient and effective method. We want to make sure that EPS is the drop down menu selected there. We want to call it whatever we want and make sure it's saved in the directory we want to save it in. We're going to make sure the aspect ratio box is unticked, and we're just going to turn this to 1920 by 1080 or whatever resolution you want to save it as, and we're going to click save. So now if we move over to After Effects, we're going to create a new project and a new composition, and we're just going to call this animate a basic graph, and we're going to set this up as 1920 by 1080. Frame rate of 25, we're going to just set it to 30-second duration and a black background color, and we'll click OK. So hit Command and the minus arrow to zoom out a little bit, or Control minus on Windows, and this is sort of where we're going to do all of our basic animation. So first thing we need to do is bring in that EPS file that we just created. So if we navigate to where we saved that image, click on it there, that's our rplot.eps, and just drag that and drop that over here. Now it's a good idea to try and keep everything in a reasonably sensible file structure, especially as you begin to create slightly more complex animations over time. So it always helps to start off being organized. So I'm just going to create a compositions folder and drag our new basic composition into that, and an assets folder, and then within the assets folder I'm going to create an images file, and we're just going to store that in there. So this is just sort of good housekeeping. And then we're going to grab the rplot and we're going to drag it down into our composition, and then we see it appear. So what we're probably going to want to do now is just add a solid onto the background, and the reason we exported this as an EPS and not a PNG is because it really helps to keep the hex color codes in your ggplot that you set the same as the hex color codes in After Effects. I've done a video on how you can do this separately, and it sort of explains why a little bit. But all we're going to do here now is go new layer, and we're going to add a new solid layer. And this is exactly the same hex color code here, 004040, that I've set to the background of my ggplot that we've exported from our studio. So we're going to click OK. We can just keep that as deep cyan solid, and it automatically puts that in a solids folder over here for you and adds it to our composition. Now at the moment, because of the drawing order, the deep cyan solid layer we've just created is on top of the R plot. So if we just drag that and plot that underneath, we can see our plot, and you can see that the background color of the plot is the same as the background color solid that we've just produced. So if we wanted to change the size of our plot, for example here, if we just click on our plot and then we rescale it, so we can move it around, and if we hold the shift key it maintains the aspect ratio, so we could make it the full screen if we wanted, or if we wanted to make sure that the animation was going to be in the top left corner, we could move it over to here or move it to the center. And if you want to align it perfectly central, we can come up here to the align panel, and this aligns it vertically and this aligns it horizontally to the composition. Okay, so let's make it a little bit bigger so that we can see what we're doing, holding shift to maintain the aspect ratio, and zoom in a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new layer, a new shape layer. And so if we come up here to shape, new shape layer. Now effectively what we're going to be using this image in After Effects to do is we're going to trace over this image by creating shapes over the top of it in After Effects, and then we're going to subsequently animate those shapes. So we can think of this literally like a tracing template, effectively, that we're going to then sort of use to create shapes over the top and then animate those shapes subsequently, and then we can get rid of this underlying image. So let's take our first line here, which comes along here. This is our annual deficit line, if anybody's interested in the data. And so if we just zoom in a little bit there, all we're going to do is come up here to the pen tool. So the shortcut for that is G. It tells you the shortcut if you hover over it. So we're going to hit G, and then we're going to come over here and we can see that we're now going to start to draw a line. So if we click for our first point, and then we move our mouse along to where we have a change in the line, and we click for our second point, and then we click for our third point. And we see that this line's really thick at the moment, but don't worry about that. We can change that. It's just remembering the previous settings from the last time I used it. And we're just going to go along the line, clicking at each of the changes in direction on the line. And then if we double click just to close the line, and it'll appear, and we can see all of those points that we've just added into the shape here. Now, what we're probably going to want to check, because we're just interested in having a line, we're not interested in having a shape, is to come up to fill and just make sure that we'll click on the word fill, not on the box here, and just make sure that this option selected the sort of red line through the white box. That indicates no fill at all. If we click to solid fill, for example, then clicked OK, we could then change the color of the solid fill here if we were doing a shape. But because we're just interested in creating a line, we just want to make sure that that option's selected. Click OK. And then here, if we come along, look at our stroke option, make sure that we've got a stroke option selected there. So if you can't see one, it's possible that you've got this option selected. So you see, if I click none, it deselects and disappears, but we want a solid stroke line. Click OK, and then on this number here, we can scroll to the left or right and adjust the width of that line. Or we can type a number in manually. So let's go for 10, just so we can see what we're doing. So at the moment, all we have is a line, and the next bit's going to be where the magic comes in. So if we come down to our composition and drop this little drop down arrow on here, maybe a good idea just to rename it, so we can right click and just put annual deficit line, just so that we can keep track of which objects are which. And so we've dropped the little drop down arrow on our object there, on our shape, and then we're going to click the contents, and we want to effectively click add here, and then come down to trim paths. And this trim paths is going to allow you to do all of the animation effectively. So if we open up the trim paths option that's just appeared here, you'll see two stopwatches, one next to end, one next to start. So those are the two we're interested here. And just to demonstrate how this is going to effectively work, if we just grab the 100% and we can just scroll it to the left, and if you watch the line, it comes all the way back to the beginning, and then if we go all the way up to 100%, so all the way down to 0%, all the way up to 100%. And notice how this goes from right to left. So if we started at 0, we could then animate this up to 100%. Alternatively, if you wanted the line to go the other way, this one, the stopwatch starts at 0, but then we can drag it all the way up to 100% and see how the line moves in the opposite direction. So depending on the direction we want the animation to go in, depends on which of these start or end stopwatches we want to use. And between the combination of these two, you can do quite a lot. So let's just say, for example, we want it to go from left to right like this. So we might, for example, click on there and hit 0. So currently we can't see any of the line. And then if we click this little stopwatch, we put down our first keyframe. And we see a little diamond symbol appear just here. And so then if we move our time slider across to say 3 seconds, somewhere around there, and then we click this little keyframe just here, see it puts down another diamond, but at the moment it's still at 0. So we've got, if we drag this back a bit here, we can see we've got that's at 0 and that's at 0. And see this number here doesn't change. But this keyframe, for example, we might want it to have completed all of the line animation by 2 seconds 24, so nearly 3 seconds. So if we move this all the way up to 100%, that means that the line will now be complete when it gets to 3 seconds. And if we now move the time cursor back, we can see that actually the line animates over this period of 3 seconds. And so if we hit our space bar while we're back at the beginning, we can see that that does in fact animate the line over 3 seconds. So what we're going to do is just highlight these two keyframes by just clicking anywhere on here with the left click cursor and just dragging a box over so it highlights in blue both of the keyframes. And then if we right click and come down to keyframe assistant and we click easy ease, and then if we hit spacebar again, we see it just adds a little bit of motion towards the start and the end. So it kind of eases the animation in and it eases the animation towards the end. So it just adds a little bit more sort of dynamic to the animation itself. And that's really all there is to it. And if that's sort of what all you were after and you can effectively build on this and get quite complicated, then by all means tune out. Thanks for tuning in. But if you just stick with us, we're going to go a little bit further with this graph and just see sort of what else we can do. So we've got our first line there. So maybe we want to add the second line in. So we'll just collapse that down for a second. We'll come up to here. We'll go layer, new shape layer so that we can draw a new layer for this second line. And exactly as before, we'll hit G for our shortcut for our pen tool, or just come up here to click it if you can't find that. And then make sure that our new shape layer is selected. Maybe we'll rename it to line 2. Something informative for you, and then we'll just click just as before, come down to where it changes direction. You see at the moment it's still white, but it also remembers the sort of size of the stroke width that we used for our previous line. Get to the end, double click, creates a shape. So again, we're going to come and drop down a little arrow on line 2, come to contents, we're going to click add, and we're going to click trim paths, and that opens up this little trim paths section here, or we can then again adjust the start and end of this line. So say for example we wanted this cumulative line, for example here, which is what the new line that we just created there represents. Maybe we want this line to be a different color, and maybe we want it to be a dashed line. So in this same panel down here in the composition, we go to stroke, we open up all of the different stroke settings. So again, we can adjust the stroke width here if we want to, the same as we can adjust the stroke width up here, and you see it changes the number at the same time. So we'll just set that back to 10, so it's consistent width with the first one. And so let's say we want this to be a different color, so we can click the color here, or again we can click the stroke color up here and we can change that to red, for example, or you can enter your hex code color here that you prefer and click OK. And then we can make this a dashed line by, for example, clicking the plus symbol here, and see how it's got sort of quite a lot of dashes at the moment. So if we turn this to the right, we can reduce the number of dashes to however many we want. So for example, we could go to very few, or we could make it, so maybe there, should we go? And then we can also offset it. So for example, if the dashes aren't in the right position, you can actually move them along. And you can actually animate it like this too if you wanted to. So for example, you could start here and then over 3 seconds you could move the animation along. In fact, we can sort of show that. So for example, it starts here, and if we click again the little stopwatch, and then we move along to 3 seconds, you can see our other line moving as we animate there, and then we move this along, let's just to an arbitrary amount. See, it sets another keyframe down there for us. We've got our other little diamond there. Come back to the beginning and hit our spacebar, and see how the line animates along. So we can apply this exact same method if we wanted to animate the dashed line across the center there. So we would just come up to layer, new, shape layer again, and if we click on we can zoom in just to make sure we've got it reasonably accurate. Make sure that our new shape layer is selected, click our first point, and then if we come all the way, if we come up to the pen tool, make sure the pen tool is selected, make sure our shape layer is selected. If we click our first point there, and then because we want it to be a straight line, rather than just clicking here and it could be anywhere, if we want it to be a straight line, if we hold shift and then do our second click point, it will give us a perfectly straight line. And then just as we have before, we can come down to the sort of composition panel down here, come to shape, come to our stroke, so we can change the stroke settings. Maybe we want it to be black, so we can drag the black slider over there. We can add the dashes, for example, hit the plus sign, and we can maybe add some more dashes. Maybe we want to offset it so that it fits nicely with our lines on our figure. And then if we hit V, we can just click anywhere else on the image. And so if we were to just collapse all of these down, for example, for now, we could just hide our original R plot, and that's what we would have underneath. And if we hit spacebar, we could see that our animation now moves as if the graph wasn't there, because we've just created shape layers over the top of our image, and we can then just toggle our image off at the end. And so that's sort of the very basics of it. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail now about how you could maybe use those sort of different techniques to animate the axes as well of your graph. So for example, if we toggle it back on, zoom out a little bit. So I think this is a little bit of a cheat, but if for example we went to layer, new, we went to shape layer again, and this time we're just going to click and draw a box over where our first axis is, and this time we're going to come up to our fill and we're going to click that and we're going to set that to a solid color. And you see how it's disappeared now, and that's because we've effectively drawn a rectangle that's in the stacking order down here over the top of our plot. And so we'll click OK here, and then we'll come up and we'll click the stroke and we'll turn the stroke off. So it's now effectively just a box. We hit V and then we can deselect it. And so it's effectively just masking our axes, our y-axis. And we can do, so let's just rename that to be y-axis mask. And then if we do exactly the same, layer, new, shape layer, we can draw another shape layer that covers our x-axis, and it remembers all of our settings before. So this is just a cyan filled rectangle with no stroke on the outside, and we'll label this x-axis. And so if for example we wanted our axes to be revealed at some point during our animation, we could effectively just move now these boxes that we've placed over the top of it. So if we come to our x-axis and our composition panel and we hit the shortcut key P, that'll open up the position sort of function. And this is currently the position where that rectangle is in X and Y space. So for example, if we move it, we can see the rectangle moves along the x-axis or along the y-axis. So I'll just hit Command Z to undo all of that. And so the first thing we'll do is we'll just lay down our first keyframe by clicking the position stopwatch. And then if we move our time slider over to 3 seconds, if we wanted our x-axis to reveal, we could just slide this slider here so that it moves all the way across. And so if we move it off the screen there, see it places our second keyframe. And so over this 3 seconds, we would then have our axis revealed to us, our x-axis revealed. The y-axis remains hidden because we haven't animated this other rectangle just yet. So if we move our time slider back to the beginning and hit spacebar, we can see it effectively reveals our x-axis. Even though the image isn't actually being animated itself, it's now being revealed. And so we can do exactly the same with the y-axis, for example. Click on the y-axis in the composition pane, hit P on the shortcut key, make sure our time slider is back at the beginning, and if we wanted it to animate at exactly the same time, we can just click and drag to select these two keyframes. Maybe what we'll do first is right click, go to keyframe assistant and make them easy ease too, so that there's a bit of sort of dynamic in the animation of these sliders as they reveal the axes. And then we'll right click, we'll just Command C and then select our y-axis and then Command V or Control C, Control V on a PC and paste those keyframes into the y-axis mask. So I'm calling this a mask. That's not a technical definition, I don't think. There is a technical thing called a mask. I've just labelled it here because to me it's doing the same job. It's just masking the y and x axes. And so now if we take our slider back to the beginning and hit the space bar, we can see that they both reveal, but now we've got a problem. So our y-axis mask is moving in the same direction, and maybe we don't want it to move in the same direction. Maybe we would rather the y-axis be revealed vertically and the x-axis be revealed horizontally. And so we can just come back to our y-axis keyframes down here, highlight them both and click delete. Make sure our time slider is back at the beginning, hit our first position keyframe here, move across to 3 seconds, and if while we're sliding this time slider we hold the shift key, see it snaps to the other keyframe that we've got there, so sliding over, snap. And so that means that now if we place our keyframe on our y-axis, it's going to be exactly the same position on the time scale as the keyframe in the x-axis. And so now rather than adjusting the y dimension, the x dimension, so we just adjust the y dimension, and so we want this to go up. And so click and we just drag this, or we can type in a value if we know the value we want it to move to. Highlight these, click and highlight these two keyframes, right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. Now if we drag our slider back to the beginning and we hit spacebar, both of the axes reveal themselves at the same time as we have our lines animating. And so if we wanted our axes to reveal first and then the line to animate after, for example, so these are going to reveal in the first 3 seconds, and then we wanted the line to animate in the next 3 seconds, we can come down to our annual deficit line, just open it up here so we can see our keyframes. If we drag our time slider across, hold shift so it snaps in. And then if we just highlight these 2 keyframes in the annual deficit line, just click and drag them across, again hold shift and it will snap to the time slider. And so now if we go back to the beginning and now our 6-second animation, our axis will reveal, and then the second 3 seconds our line will animate across. So that's the absolute basics of animating a graph, I think, from an image in After Effects. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. If you know a better way of doing it, leave it in the comments. If you have any requests for other videos, just leave it in the comments and I'll do my best to sort of work it out and then post a video on it. So thanks very much for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and like, and see you all soon. Cheers, bye.